Hello and welcome back to another episode of Notion Bonsai. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining everything you need to know when it comes to overwintering your trees. So in this video today, we're going to be going over some of my methods for overwintering your bonsai and really ensuring that they survive the winter. But before we start, remember to subscribe and leave a like in this video as it really helps out the channel a lot. Now, I did cover this topic last year on overwintering bonsai, but since then I have learned a lot more about overwintering and bonsai from various bonsai creators, bonsai YouTubers, and of course you guys in the comments. So if there's anything in this video that I don't cover, be sure to share it down in the comments, things that you do, and we can all learn from each other that way. So first of all, what is overwintering? Whenever I first got into bonsai, I thought overwintering was this complicated thing that you had to do to a tree or do something to the soil to do something to the tree in winter. But really, it's not as complicated as I once thought. Overwintering is simply the term we give to helping bonsai through the coldness of winter. And now you may hear this and think, oh, this is great. I will just take my bonsai, bring it indoors over the winter, and that way it will be protected from the frost. Unfortunately, this is not the case at all. Whenever you take a tree that is really meant to go dormant in the dormant season, and you bring that tree indoors, what you're essentially doing is forcing that tree to stay actively growing. Now, you may not notice this after the first year of doing this, but if you do keep doing this year after year, you will seriously stress the tree out and it will diminish the health of the tree over time. Especially deciduous trees, they really love to go dormant in the dormant season, and I like to imagine it as if bonsai are like us, in the sense that after a long day you need a rest so that whenever you get back up again the next day you're ready to go, full of energy. So you will notice after a tree has gone through that nice dormant period, whenever spring comes around again, the tree will be so vigorously growing versus when you tried to keep it actively growing throughout winter. And I would like to say, just on a side note, that if you do live in a warm climate and you have a deciduous tree and you're sort of struggling to get that tree to go dormant for the winter because your climate is so hot, there are workarounds for getting the tree to experience this dormancy. You can take your tree and place it in a refrigerator for about 6 weeks in order to simulate that dormant period. Just make sure that you don't have the tree freezing in there, as it could harm the tree. The only exception to this needed cold period would be tropical species like the Ficus. I keep these species indoors throughout the whole year and I found they do just fine like that. And although they don't lose their leaves for the winter, I have noticed Ficus do have a period of reduced growth. So in a way, they go dormant. When it comes to overwintering, you will live in either one of two climates, a warm climate or a cold climate. If you live in a warmer climate where in the winter it doesn't really drop anywhere below -4, -5 degrees, then your trees should be fine. Although there are some precautions you can take just to make sure your trees are at optimal health. If you got your trees sitting on a bonsai bench like this, it can be a good idea to take your trees off the bench and place them a lot lower to the ground. That way, the trees aren't going to be hit by so much wind and direct sunlight. You see, the more wind that blows against the top of your tree and the more sunlight hits the top of the tree, there is an increase in what's known as transpiration, and that is the evaporation of water from the foliage off the tree. But at the same time, if it's really cold, like -4 degrees, the actual soil in the pot can freeze. And when that happens, the rate of water uptake by the roots going into the foliage is a lot slower. So you can get some dieback and browning on your evergreen trees that are transpiring a lot quicker than water can be taken up. And this is known as photoinhibition. But if you take your trees and place them a little bit lower to the ground where there's less wind, less sunlight, this can stop this problem. It's good to note that whenever you do take your bonsai off your shelves, you don't really want to have your bonsai sitting like in direct contact with the concrete if you have concrete in your garden, because concrete has somewhat of a high conductivity to cold, so it's easily able to absorb and retain coldness. So if you have your trees sitting on concrete over the winter, the cold can actually travel from the concrete up into the roots of your bonsai and damage them. So instead, what I like to do is take something like a wire mesh, sit the tree on the mesh just to elevate it off the concrete. Or if you wish to, you can also place your trees on some wood, like I have done here underneath my bonsai benches. And now that you have taken all your bonsai off the benches for winter, I find this is a really good time and opportunity to spend removing algae that may have built up through the growing season on your bonsai benches from watering day after day. What I did to remove the algae was to use some white vinegar on the algae, give it a little bit of a scrub just to sort of loosen it up and work the vinegar into the wood. Then after this, I took a pressure washer to the wood and blasted off the algae. But in hindsight, I wouldn't pressure wash my bonsai benches again, because if you pressure wash too close, the pressure of the water can actually lift some of the wood fibers, and this would degrade your bench over time. If you guys have any suggestions for me or better ways of removing algae or even preventing it from forming, please leave them down in the comments for me. That would be really helpful. The only thing that I would say is that I don't want to use any harsh chemicals that could affect the health of the trees. And now if you live in a much colder climate where the temperatures go to easily below -10 degrees, then you definitely want to protect your trees in the winter. And to do this, you can place your trees in either a cold frame or a greenhouse or unheated basement or garage. But you may also be thinking, how come the trees at my local park don't need protected in the winter? Why does my bonsai need to be protected? And this is because large trees like this one here, their roots are able to go deep underground away from the coldness so they don't freeze. But with bonsai, like this little azalea bonsai that's now beginning to shed some leaves for the winter, they don't have all that ground space to grow their roots into. So because they're in a little small pot, their roots will freeze really easily. Another thing, bonsai soil is usually very aerated to allow lots of oxygen into the roots. In most of my trees, I use a mix of pumice, akadama, and lava rock. And with this soil mix, there isn't really much insulation that you would have with dirt or compost. It is important to understand that different species of trees have different cold tolerances. Some can endure the frost while others need protecting. Depending on the species of tree that you have, I recommend that you do research on the trees in your collection, as I can't possibly cover every single tree that have exceptions to the general rules. But when it comes to protecting your trees, how do we protect the trees from the winter? And to do this, I like to place my trees in either a cold frame or a mini greenhouse. The whole idea is that we want to bring the trees into an environment where it is cold, but not too cold, and also not too warm. We don't want the trees to heat up and break dormancy. So we're really looking for that Goldilocks zone right in the middle. Last year, I built a little mini cold frame to place some of my bonsai into, just to protect them from the frost. And this year, because I have a lot more trees and a lot more maple seedlings that I really want to protect because they're, really young and delicate, I'm gonna need more overwintering space. And if you remember last year, I had this little mini greenhouse that I put some of my trees into. But since then, over the last year in the growing season, because I've been watering trees in there, the joints of the greenhouse began to rust. And I just didn't quite trust putting all my bonsai in a greenhouse that's rusting, so I threw it out. Today we're going to be assembling this slightly larger one. Whenever I think back to how the other one rusted, it was actually in these joints that the most rust occurred. You see on the pipe here, it's all galvanized, but on the end of these poles, that is a weakness. So as I assemble this, what I'm going to do is apply some grease around this area just to prevent rust in the future. I'm using some multi-purpose copper grease. This is designed for the brake discs in a car, but what I really like about this one is it's lead free, and it says it forms a dense protective coating that will not wash off in normal use. What I really like about this greenhouse is that there's plenty of room in each shelf for various trees of different heights, but more specifically the top shelf. Because the apex goes up like this, I'll be able to get lots of more larger trees in there. And now I have filled this greenhouse with as many trees as I possibly can. And as you can see in this shelf here, I have placed all my Japanese maples that I grew from seed in a previous video. Earlier in the year, I took the big seed tray that I grew and I separated all the Japanese maples into individual pots and also into some fresh bonsai soil. So hopefully whenever spring comes around again, these trees will have survived the winter nice and safe in this greenhouse. And because they're in nice fresh bonsai soil, we should see a lot of growth from them. As you can see, this cold frame that I have here is the one that I built last year. In this, I have put my junipers like Itoigawas. I've got a pine, some azaleas, and these trees do just fine in here. And now when you put your trees away for the winter, you may be wondering, do my trees still need light? When it comes to what type of tree you will have generally one of three types of trees: evergreen, semi-evergreen, or deciduous. Starting with deciduous trees like this Japanese maple. Because deciduous trees lose all of their leaves for winter, the tree no longer is able to photosynthesize because it has no leaves. So deciduous trees really don't need any light whatsoever. If you wanted to, you could place your deciduous trees in the dark and it wouldn't make a difference to the health of the tree. But when it comes to semi-evergreen like this azalea and evergreen like this Hinoki cypress, they do still photosynthesize over the winter as they get some light during the day. But because it is so cold, the rate of photosynthesis does slow down, so they don't need as much light as they would need during the growing season. Now, when it comes to putting your trees away for the winter, there's a few things that I like to do to prepare the tree, get the tree ready before we put it into storage. With trees that lose some of their leaves, I like to go along and pick out any of the leaves that have fallen off of the tree, as decaying matter sitting on top of your bonsai pots can create fungus and you can get mold problems as the trees are stored away for the winter. And while I'm doing this, I like to take the time to do some weeding, getting rid of any weeds that may be popping up. The weeds can have an environment in which they can thrive, and it just becomes a real mess when spring comes around. Moving on to this Japanese maple, as you can see, there's quite a lot of leaves in there also. I just picked these out, and I really love the vibrant red color that the Japanese maples produce at this time of year. Isn't that so beautiful? I also like to give the trunks of bonsai a little bit of a scrub, just to remove any moss or algae that may be growing on this section that might provide too much moisture in that area over winter. So to clean this, you can take a toothbrush or a nylon brush. You see, if moisture stays in this area for too long, you can get a little bit of rotting, or on species where you want that nice craggly old looking bark, excess moisture in these areas can prevent that from occurring. I'm pretty happy with that. And now, just as a final thing before I put my trees away for the winter, what I like to do is what's known as a winter wash. And this is essentially spraying something on the trees to control pests and fungus. As if pests like scale insects lay dormant on the tree over winter, or fungus is on the wood of the tree over winter, when spring comes around again and the temperatures heat up, especially if your trees are in a greenhouse or cold frame, it'll heat up pretty quickly, and this is a really nice condition for fungus and scale insects and other pests to thrive. So I think it's really important that we treat them now, just before we put them away for winter. That way, when spring does come around, our trees will be really happy. The winter wash that I like to use is a dilute solution of lime sulphur, diluted in a ratio of 20:1. If for whatever reason you can't get lime sulphur in your area, there are commercial fungicides and pesticides out there that you can use as a winter wash. And it is good to note also that lime sulphur cannot be used on every species of tree. I don't really like to use lime sulphur on my azaleas or ficus, so it's really important to research the species of tree that you're going to be using it on first. But with azaleas, what I like to do is use a commercial fungicide like this one here, and I just missed it on the tree one day. This is just to kill off any fungal spores that may be on the tree. I will take this, leave it and let it sit for a day, then come back tomorrow and spray this again with a commercial pesticide. And that's a way of getting around it if you don't have lime sulphur. Just as a disclaimer before using lime sulphur, it can be an irritant if it gets on your skin, and it's also really not good if it gets in your eyes. So if you wish to, wear gloves and eye protection. So before mixing your lime sulphur, I recommend you use a ratio calculator online in order to work out how much lime sulphur you need to water. And because this holds 1.25 liters of water, I'll be mixing in 65 milliliters of high quality lime sulphur. High quality lime sulphur will have this dark, deep, rich orange color to it, where less quality lime sulphurs tend to have more of a light yellow color to them. Just gonna pour it in here. You want to make sure that the same day that you mix the lime sulphur is the same day that you treat the trees with lime sulphur. I find that if you leave the lime sulphur in the container overnight and you go to use it the next day, the solution will turn white and it won't be as effective at treating fungus and insects. So you really want to use it all after mixing it. Just before I miss this tree, I'm going to use this opportunity as a time to prune this little apple air layering that we took earlier in the year. That way, whenever this tree begins to build some buds and they open in spring, we can develop ramification a lot faster. So now is a really good time to do some winter pruning if you so wish to. So I'm just going to prune these back quite hard in the hopes that this tree will create new buds over winter to open in spring. I cut these in quite tight. I don't really care about how the tree looks at the moment. All I really care about is getting the growth nice and dense. So it will look somewhat bare after I do this. But this one on top, I'm going to keep as the apex and leader of the tree. That way the tree can continue to taper. So I'm just going to take a little bit of scrap wire, hook it around one of the branches as an anchor, and come up around this branch. And all I really want to do is straighten it. The wire doesn't have to be super tight. Just going to bring this up like this. Although it looks kind of silly now, this will help the tree develop a really nice taper long term. I'm going to cover this nice pot, that way the lime sulphur doesn't stain it, especially if you have really expensive bonsai pots that go up to like 200, 300, 400 pounds. The last thing you want to do is get it lime sulphur stained. So to protect your pots, I just recommend wrapping them in some aluminium foil and they will be just fine. As you spray, you want to cover every inch of the tree so you can rotate it, spray some more, get in every single inch of the tree. I'm just going to tilt this to drip off some excess lime sulphur, and I'm really happy with this. And even if some trees aren't being put away for storage, like this big Osakazuki maple, I'm going to have this one sit outdoors all winter because it won't fit in my greenhouse or cold frame. And it's got lots of roots, so this tree should be completely fine. But I'm still going to treat it with a lime sulphur solution. And you may also notice in some of the trees that they do in Japan, their maple's bark has this really nice white color to it. And that is from years and years of being treated with lime sulphur. The trees gain this sort of patina on the trunk of them, which I think looks really cool versus the green color of maples. I really want to cover as much of the tree as possible. I'm not really worried about any dieback this tree has at the moment. I can come in spring and clean that up. And also before you put your trees away, I find this is an excellent time to check trees that you have wired earlier in the year and check trees that might need a little bit of a tweak before they're put away for the winter. So this juniper that I wired earlier in the year, if I look close at it, I'm just checking to see if the wire is biting in or not. And from what I can see, the wire isn't biting in too much, so I should be fine to leave the wire on this over the dormant period. This one, on the other hand, has no wire on it. This is a little Hinoki cypress that we worked on earlier in the year. We put it into this nice bonsai pot, and I did take the wire that we put on this off halfway through the growing season as it was just starting to bite in. But now that the tree's flushed out a little bit more, I feel that I could add some wire to this just to tweak it ever so slightly, so that whenever spring comes around and the wires set the branches in place, I can take the wire off and the tree can flush out from spring into a really nice position. I've just done a little tweak to this tree just to set some of the branches where I want them, but this tree has a lot more growing to do over the next year, and when spring comes I will take this tree and place it into a much larger pot. And I'm also going to do a little bit of winter pruning so that whenever spring comes and this tree grows, the tree will put energy into the branches I want them to. The top of this tree has become a little bit congested, so I'm going to cut off some parts that I believe will create inverse taper over time, like this in here. That's not needed. And that just thinned it out a little. And when this grows, instead of the tree putting energy into the branches that were once here, it'll now go to the extremities and this will just shoot out. And now that we've put all our trees away for the winter, what do we do when it comes to watering and fertilization? When it comes to watering, I would say to follow the general guidelines that you would follow during the growing season, and that is to never let the soil fully dry out. And you also don't want your soil to be fully moist. So just like most principles and things in bonsai, we are looking for that Goldilocks zone of water. If you take one of your trees and just feel the top layer of soil, if it's damp, then it means it doesn't really need watering. But if it's starting to dry out and you can feel, you know, it needs a little bit of water, that's when you should water your trees. Although it is important to remember, in winter, because it is colder and the trees don't have as much foliage, in general, they won't need as much water as they do need during the growing seasons. And when it comes to fertilization, without going into too much detail, because the trees are going through a dormant period with a slower rate of growth, I would personally opt for a balanced fertilizer with a low nitrogen content, something like an NPK value of 555. I would really use this sparingly, maybe once every 4 to 6 weeks during the dormant season. Or on the other hand, if you wish to, you can apply a slow release fertilizer that can be slowly and gradually released into the soil with each watering during the dormant period. And on that, I'm going to end off this video right here. If you enjoyed, please be sure to leave a like in this video, as it really helps out the channel a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And if you're new, remember to subscribe and hit the bell to get updates from whenever I upload a video. That way you can see if a new video is premiering. You can chat with me live there and then. If you have any suggestions for me about overwintering that I missed in this video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below. I'm always open to new and different ideas in bonsai. If you would like to support me and the things that I do on this channel, hit the thanks button down below. And if you would like to stay updated on all the things that I do off camera, please follow me on Instagram. It's at notionbonsai, and you'll be able to see all the things that I do on there. But on that, thank you so very much for watching.